Let's welcome in our co-hosts on this Thursday morning. He is a New York Times best-selling author, John Gilstrap.
Good morning.
He is a former member of the House of Delegates and formerly the Deputy Revenue Secretary in the state of West Virginia, Mr. John Doyle.
Good morning, everybody.
Gentlemen, both of you live out around that Jefferson County line or in Jefferson County, and the storms last night caused some damage there. And just checking with both of you to make sure that your homes are safe and all is well there.
Yes, we're fine. As
Yes.
far as I know, we didn't lose any trees. I haven't wandered the woods, but I don't think so.
Good.
Yes.
All good there, Mr. Doyle?
Yeah, my house to here, everything's fine. You know, it's I was in Martinsburg when the storm started, like around 4:30, and there was a double lightning strike. I swear it wasn't more than a quarter of a mile from my car, and it was raining seriously, and everybody was worried. Everybody was slowing down, so therefore the traffic was building up. And I'm thinking, I need to get out of here.
Yeah. I was actually at the CATF theater. Magdalene was the show that I was watching, and it's actually a very good show. I'm a big supporter of CATF, and this is actually Mary Magdalene and Simon Peter talking about the need to document the words of Jesus, who at this point has been dead for 18 years within the play. And Peter is in the process of saying, Mary, the Lord needs us to document his words. And when he said that, there's this clap of thunder outside. And he said, see? He worked it into the play. It was pretty.
That's a good actor right there. Right? That's a good actor. Our guest in this segment is Senator Amy Grady. She is the Senate Education Chair, joining us via telephone. Good morning, Senator. Thank you so much for being a part of our program this morning.
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Amy.
I believe you know both of our co-hosts here. Amy, very nice. And first,
yes, I do.
I want to ask you about the literacy scores. As this report came out, I was reading it and immediately texted you and asked you to come on the program a couple of days back. And this covered some of the things that you guys have been addressing in the K-3 programs, too. Can you get into that and discuss the report and why you think the scores have improved in the state?
Well, I'm going to tell you, Rob, you guys remember we've talked several times about the Third Grade Success Act that we passed in 2023. And we're starting to see some results from that because that focus on the science of reading in grades K through 3 that we started that next year, we're seeing the improvements from that. But when we passed the bill, I said the whole time we have to be patient because it's going to be 6, 7, maybe 8 years before we see the results we really want because the implementation of it will be staggered, of course. And starting to see this already is really exciting because it's what we really wanted and it's what we need. So those results aren't surprising to me. I try to track it based on my youngest daughter is when she was going into first grade was the first year that we really implemented it. She's going into third grade this year. So I've been tracking it based on what I'm seeing with her class and the classes along with that. And I'm really excited about it, and I think everybody else is too, those that are involved in education anyway. Those who aren't involved in education may look at it and say, 5%, that's not much. But in education, 5% over the course of just a couple of years is a big improvement. And if it continues to go on that trend, then we're going to look at, doubling that again in another year or two and then continue. So I'm excited about it.
So you regard these as sustainable improvement numbers?
Absolutely, 100%. If you think about it, we've already seen this improvement, and this was also with just getting classroom aides into every K-3 classroom. Actually, third grade doesn't have those yet. This year will be the first year that third grade classrooms will have a classroom assistant. And getting the training of teachers with the science of reading instruction, all of that taking place at the same time that we're seeing these improvements, where everybody's still learning. And so once everybody really, really gets all the training they need and know how to implement it. I know as a classroom teacher, that might be 5 or 6 years into it before you feel like you're really, really, really good at teaching that. And so looking at that, I'm really excited. I think everybody will be impressed with how much we will continue to grow.
Now, my co-host will have some questions on that too, but before we get to that, I also want to ask you about the legal conflict that House Bill 2755 is provided in the state as well. And I know this was a bill which, while you were personally in favor of state oversight of the Board of Education, you voted against the bill because you didn't like how it went about being passed.
Very true. I voted against the bill because I felt we needed to do that as a constitutional amendment, which we had tried a couple of years prior. In 2022, we tried that. And so the voters voted it down. I think we dropped the ball as a legislature without getting the education that they needed out there in order for voters to understand why to vote for that, number one. But number two, we also had 4 constitutional amendments on that ballot, which is hard, a lot of legalese for the average person to read and understand what they're voting on. So, statistically, it shows that most of the time people are going to vote no on an amendment if they don't understand it. So I think we dropped the ball on that a lot. I do feel like we need to educate the public into why we need to have that constitutional amendment, but passing a bill to say we're going to do it anyway, I didn't feel like it was the right way to go about it. I don't know how the challenge is going to go. We knew when we passed the bill that it was probably going to be challenged, so this isn't a surprise to anyone. But that's not my job to decide, if it's constitutional or not. So we'll see what happens.
Mr. Gilstrap.
Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, John. I'm great. How are you?
I am well, thanks. Literacy, of course, is near and dear to my heart. I'm curious, it seems to me that to get children, particularly at that age, interested in reading, you've got to get them interested in reading. So how much is driven by the selection of material to capture their imaginations as opposed to, it's not like learning how to spell, right? It's about how to capture the imagination. So what goes into that? What it is that they're learning to read, the material that they're reading?
I know you probably know this, but a lot of people don't. The love for reading really generally comes from reading at home.
Yes.
Reading at home to your child is so important, and pushing that to parents to make parents understand. That's how they develop a love for reading. It doesn't happen. It can happen at school, right? It can happen when they go to school, but they really need that time at home to understand that kids learn to read, learn to love books at home, and then it's fine-tuned in school. But there was nothing in the bill, John, that mentioned specifically what kinds of literature or materials that had to be used. I do know that we have all of our classroom curriculums and a lot of our classrooms that have school libraries and things. Most teachers do push kids to choose books that they're interested in. I know that's one thing that teachers know and do really well, is to understand that in order to get a kid to want to read, it has to be something that they want to read, right? It has to be something they're interested in. You have to find that thing that makes that child want to learn more. And whether that's finding biographies, I teach 4th grade, so I've got a lot of realistic fiction that my students love. It's based on historical events, but the characters really aren't real, historical fiction. And so you find what makes them tick, and that's what you use it for. And so I think teachers do a really good job of that. But the bill doesn't address it in general. That's just a common practice in classrooms.
So as a teacher, how does this bill manifested itself in a real way in your classroom?
So I teach 4th grade. I have not, the bill focuses on kindergarten through 3rd grade.
Okay.
I've not seen a huge difference yet, except for, I will tell you, there is a difference that I'm seeing with my students when they come into my classroom. They are not lacking those 1st and 2nd grade skills as much as they were before, because with the Third Grade Success Act, the focus is on providing those interventions in those grade levels before they get to 3rd grade. And then if they're still struggling, then you consider, do you need to hold them back? So I'm seeing some improvements year over year in the last couple of years, but not enough to where I can say the older students are showing a big difference yet. But I'm hoping next year's class, which will be, the class that came into 1st grade when we first implemented the Third Grade Success Act, I'll be able to tell a difference. I can tell a difference in my youngest daughter when she does work at home and how she decodes words and things based on science of reading, as opposed to my son who just graduated high school and how he was taught. And so, comparing those two, I think it's making a difference.
Also, isn't there a lot of throat clearing, that getting rid of the COVID isolation years of kind of getting back into the learning process that kind of working 100%. Its way through the system?
Yes, 100%. So we are seeing, this past year, our 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classes were the ones who were in kindergarten, first and second grade, those developmental years during COVID. And so comparing what you're seeing now to, seeing if the Third Grade Success Act is working, you also have to use that. You also have to compare, well, these were the kids who were, during COVID, were doing virtual learning. They weren't in the classroom every day. They were wearing masks whenever they're trying to learn sounds and things like that, which is detrimental. And so, you're seeing those grades. We're playing catch up with them. I'm probably always playing catch up with those grade levels because it was kindergarten, first and second, where they missed a lot of that instruction. But we'll try to catch them up as best we can, but we will make sure we don't make the same mistakes with these younger kids.
Mr. Doyle.
Amy, you all passed this the year after I left the legislature, and I was paying very close attention to it.
Yes.
And I had noticed a couple of years before, Mississippi had done something that sounded sort of similar. And they've had really, really significant success to the extent that, if you would, could you explain how the Third Grade Success Act is similar to the Third Grade Success Act is similar to or different from the law Mississippi passed?
Yeah. So, John, when I was made education chair, which was the fall of 2022, this was my number one priority. And I had already been working with the state superintendent at the time, who was David Roach, and some organizations that worked with Mississippi, who had worked directly with Mississippi when they implemented and made these changes, and also who had worked with North Carolina that did a very similar bill. So the language that we used in the bill came almost directly from a combination of Mississippi and North Carolina's bills, tailored more to specifically, what West Virginia needs. One thing that we changed that was completely different was that we put classroom aides or classroom assistant teachers in each class, kindergarten through third grade. If I had my way, I would have preferred that to be an interventionist, which would be a reading specialist, but two problems. We don't really have that many in the state in order to fill those roles, and also costs a lot more money to put a reading specialist in each classroom or in each school. So we went with the assistant teachers and training them. So that's a little different than Mississippi. But yes, Mississippi's growth was phenomenal. They were always number 50. And because of a lot of reasons, they have a high poverty rate in their states. And when they implemented a science of reading bill, their scores climbed. They climbed really, really quickly. And they started, people started looking at that and saying, what are they doing differently? And this is what they did. And so I'm happy to say we copycatted. We did a copycat version of Mississippi, because when somebody does something well and they're seeing growth, you should copy them. You should try to implement that to make sure that and we're going to see the same results.
I agree. It was a very smart move. A question I have on the not a question, but an observation. I'd like your response. On the amendment. I agree with what you said. Had I been there, and you may know that when in the last 2 years I was in, I supported putting the amendment on the ballot. I spoke for it and voted for it, and caught a lot of grief from some of my friends back home that
I'm sure you did.
That think, hey, John, this is not liberal. You shouldn't do that. Well, but anyway, I thought after it was voted down that the legislature looked a little silly by saying, okay, the voters voted it down. Now we're going to ask the Supreme Court to do it our way anyway. I just think the look wasn't very good.
So John, I don't disagree with you at all. As a matter of fact, before I voted no on that bill, on the floor, I gave a speech, and I wanted to make sure people understood that I wholeheartedly believe that the Department of Education does need oversight. I think elected people need to be given oversight over them, because they're like a fourth branch of government. I completely agree with that. However, I didn't agree with the way we were doing it, because I felt like we were saying, hey, voters, you guys voted this down already, but too bad, we're going to do what we want to do anyhow. And I felt like it was a bad look, and I felt like it told the voters that they were wrong, and instead of us educating them and then putting it back on the ballot by itself, I think would be a better thing to do than to pass a bill to say, shove it down your throat, we're going to do it anyway, no matter what you want. And I just thought that was a bad look. Some people don't agree with me, and that's okay, but I feel like I made the right call with saying that.
Okay, I'm going to step in here because I agree. I think it's a mistake to turn your back, for the legislature to turn its back on the will of the voters. But I want to push back really hard on the fact that amendment was rejected. My reading skills are as good, or I would argue better than
Yes, sir.
than average. I had moved into this state in March of 22. So that was my first votes were cast. That was such a dense amendment, and it came out of nowhere. It had no context. There was no marketing behind it. I voted no simply because I didn't have any idea what it was asking me to do. So
Exactly.
that's why I voted no. If I had actually understood or had context, or if there had been some marketing that I knew what itch I was trying to scratch, I absolutely would have voted yes. So it was not, the concept was not rejected. The word salad was rejected.
And I agree with that, John. I do. But I also think that, in that case, we dropped the ball. The legislature dropped the ball with not getting the message out to the people. And I still think that that's our job. And so when we put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, we need to make sure, A, it's worded the correct way so that people can understand what they're voting on, and B, that we message really well and say, this is why you need to support this. But neither of those things happened, and I think we dropped the ball, and that falls on our lap. And I still think that we shouldn't just pass a bill to say, well, we're going to do it because we think, we're going to assume you didn't understand what it said, when in reality, there are some people who probably completely understood what it was. And I think that there's a fine line there, and we need to make sure that we uphold what the voters say. And it's just something that I feel strongly about. And
we never discussed it here, I don't think. It was all about the property tax bill. That was really,
exactly.
that was all we talked. I don't ever remember discussing.
We did segments on each of the amendments. Some got more attention than others, obviously. But we did do segments on each of the 4 amendments that were on the ballot.
The property tax bill got a lot of attention because the governor went on a statewide town hall meetings against that one. And so that was really put in the limelight, and then you didn't really hear anything about the others. And so, but Amendment 4, which this amendment was, if you have 4 amendments on the ballot and you're looking at them and they all are word salad, what you said, John, by the time you get to that last one, you're going to vote no regardless. I get that. I completely understand. But again, I think that we need to do a better job at messaging and allow the people to say, hey, we need to change this in the Constitution, instead of us just saying, hey, we're going to take a chance because we think it's important, but you guys got it wrong. I just think that it just gives the wrong message and the wrong look to the people. And I'm happy to put it back on the ballot. I think we have the votes to do that. And then get out by itself and get out there and educate and have people understand why it's important. But, that's neither here nor there now, because here we are, right?
If the court decision is in the legislature's favor, you don't necessarily need to put it back on the ballot, do you?
Right.
I can't imagine that.
Only if you lose, you'd need to put it on the ballot. Go ahead, John Doyle.
Yeah, right. Amy and John Gilstrap, I agree with both of you, and I'm gonna raise you. I remember in the 1960s, I was in college, there was a constitutional amendment on the ballot entitled the Taxation and Finance Amendment.
Was this the state constitution?
Yes, the state. Yeah, that's the only thing we have on. And that's the only referendum you see in West Virginia is when the legislature puts a constitutional amendment up for ratification. It lost in a landslide. 2 years later, the very same amendment appeared on the ballot entitled the Better Schools Amendment, and it won in a landslide.
Mm-hmm. To see words matter, right?
Yeah, literacy.
They really do. Yes. So, but I also think that when you have 4 amendments on the ballot, I think that's too many. And 4 amendments at one time is too many as well. And I understand we had to do that because we had the numbers to get them on the ballot, but I still think it's too many for the public to try to understand what they're voting on. And when you don't understand something, your natural reaction, like John Gilstrap said, is I didn't understand exactly what it was, so I voted no. And so we have to keep that from happening.
Amy, sometimes legislators need to exercise some discipline. Okay, I can get 4 items on the ballot that I like. Okay, fine, but each additional one engenders some opponent out there that might go whole hog. If you got 4 amendments, you got 4 different sections of voters that are going to oppose to one of them. And when there's so many, the word goes out, vote against them all just so we can beat the one we want to beat.
Amy, I want to ask you a question.
Right.
Go ahead. If you wanted to comment on what John just said, please go.
No, that's okay. I agree with John. I think that's absolutely what happened. You have, like, the governor went out saying vote against this one, and so everybody voted against all of them. So, the governor and baby dog. I think it was more baby dog than the governor, honestly.
People did love that dog.
They did still. I think they still love that dog.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. The State Board of Education has been busy seizing control of local school districts in the last couple of months or year or so. And Berkeley County's had one school that had some issues as well that needed state attention. Is this something that legislative oversight of the State Board of Education would also be involved with?
Well, I think it's something that they could be involved with, yes. That I think sometimes I think we step in to take over counties a little too quickly sometimes in some cases, but in a lot of cases, I think the counties wait until too late to ask for help. When they realize that they are in a situation where they need help, they need to reach out and say, hey, we need help right now, instead of waiting until the last minute. I also think a lot of our problems are that a lot of our board members, local board members that are elected, they don't have any experience with dealing with large amounts of money like a business. So they get some training on that, but it's very minimal. And so they don't understand how to, and running a local school board is like running a business, and they don't understand how to do that. So I think getting them some more training on that is really important. But also during COVID, we talked about COVID a little bit ago, but during the COVID, our boards got used to having a lot of money that was sent in with the COVID relief funds. And instead of planning ahead and looking at when those funds are going to run out, a lot of them, put a lot of extra positions in to pay for, and when that money was gone, then they didn't want to make that decision to cut those positions, because that's a hard decision to make cuts, right? So I think there are a lot of reasons that things like that are happening, and I think more eyes on it could be better. Yeah, I do. I think the legislature controls the purse strings of the taxpayers' money, and I think in that way that's a very similar situation.
And it's important to point out, Amy, and maybe not all of our listeners understand it, almost every instance of the State Board of Education taking over local schools has to do with finances. It doesn't have to do with actual education.
That's an interesting point.
Right, it does have to do with finances, and that's the kicker. As you look at, what kind of training are we giving these board members? I know when they first come in, they get some training, but when I've spoken with board members that I know personally, they said, it's not a very in-depth financial training, and so they could definitely benefit from some things like that. I'm not saying that would actually solve the problem, but it could help. Because it's a whole different world when you're stepping in to use taxpayer money for different things. And so the legislature, that's our job. And so I think having oversight in that manner could really, really help in many ways.
I only have 30 seconds here, but does the state auditor audit local boards of education, or does that fall under a different office?
No, they do.
Okay.
And the state board of education audits and looks at the finances are reported to the Department of Education, and the State Board of Education, and the auditor also is involved.
Very good. All right. Amy, thank you so much. I appreciate your time this morning. I know you've got some big important meetings later on here in half an hour, and I'll let you get to those.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. You guys have a good day.
Thank you. Senate Education Chair Amy Grady on the program here at 8:31. In a moment, we're going to get an update in Jefferson County from Dick Myers, Deputy Director of Emergency Services there in Homeland Security, the storms last night. And then Mike Allers Jr. joins us as well.